When Silicon Valley veteran Michael Seibel agreed to mentor Airbnb's Brian Chesky and the team behind this startup-turned global phenomenon, Seibel had one condition. He said Chesky had to pay it forward and advise the next generation of entrepreneurs. It's something Seibel does every day as a partner at Y Combinator, which funds early-stage startups. Y Combinator has now funded 800 young companies that in total are worth more than $30 billion. He's here today to talk about the many entrepreneurs and innovators he sees creating solutions to persistent urban problems. And Steve Clemons is back.
Great. Thank you all for being here. I have to say, you know, it's been a long day. It's been a good day. I know you were just talking about what a long day it's been for you. It's not been a longer day for anyone here than Peter Scheer, for whom it's 8:15 in the morning tomorrow, since he just got here from Beijing. And I just feel like, Peter, you should come up and lie down on the couch, you know. So this session is I'm going to get everybody in. Everybody, yeah, plant your questions. If you don't have a question, I'm going to call on you by color of your shirt or something. I'm interested, you know, this is a session about funding change. There's one way to think about change and what startups are doing to create efficiencies or to create new ways of dealing with data or new ways of creating affinity groups or finding ways. And I'm interested in, you know, the world that you play in, because I just went through a lot of the companies that Y Combinator has been dealing with. And I'm interested in what the proportion of greed to soul is in the startup world.
Wow.
Welcome to the Atlantic.
There we go. There we go. Kick it off. I think it's really hard. I think that one thing that I work on a lot is trying to recruit founders from different backgrounds who have different life experience. And I think, unfortunately or fortunately, your life experience is really what causes you to figure out what startup you want to build. And so what I would say is that as a result, you know, disproportionate number of founders come from good backgrounds, and disproportionate number of startups out here, fortunately or unfortunately, are not serving the underserved. But I've seen a lot of change. And I think that one of the things I tell founders from underserved backgrounds is that out here, if you make it, you can make a huge change in a very little bit of time. In a traditional company, it can take 30 years. Out here, it can take 2. So that's a kind of political way of saying it's getting better.
So I'm not putting a value judgment. I'm all for greed. You know, I used to work for Richard Nixon, and so ruthlessness and greed are comfortable for me. But you know,
not for me. I don't feel comfortable
I
with
started
that.
out, you know, looking at you. So you have the Detroit Water Project, and I really recommend people take a look. The Detroit Water Project attempts to throw a life preserver to those drowning in unpaid water bills by connecting donors to those things. Who would have thought there was an app or a program in that? And that's what. And you also did, and
yeah.
That came out of the same shop that Airbnb did.
That came out of the same shop.
And so, how in that world, when you're thinking about where to put your thumb, who to spend time to sort of give them the Mark Seibel 30-second straitjacket talk, how do you determine, or is everybody equal?
You know what we think? I think unlike other investors, we don't go in with a thought process around what we want to invest in. Because we get to invest in so many companies, we do about 100 to 120 every 6 months. It's about picking interesting and passionate people. And so I was at Tiffany's interview when she came in. She heads up Detroit Water Project. And she was just amazing. It was, you know, with almost nothing, she was able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and prevent thousands of people from having the water turned off.
And did she get a cut somehow?
No, it's a nonprofit.
Yeah. Oh, it's
yeah. So when she walks in and she's like, "This is what I've done," you know, it doesn't take. I don't have to be that smart to say we want to help.
Right.
She's already impressed the hell out of us just with what she walked in the room with.
So when you look out there, we've been talking today about cities and really kind of next generation cities, how they're going to change. The Internet of Everything is the backbone of these things. You know, I'm always interested when I hear about smart mayors and data mayors. What are the non-data mayors and what are the dumb cities? But when you look out there about your role as a change agent in what cities of the future are becoming, what do you see as the big deficits, the big blind spots right now that could be filled by some of your, I guess, clients or pals in the incubator world?
So I think it's interesting. I think it's cities and mayors have a really hard job. They have a lot of constituencies. They have a population that spans decades. And I think where I see startups kind of operating in is in the cracks. When there is a problem, I think people from my generation, instead of soliciting a solution from the government, kind of seek a solution outside of the government. And so we have a lot of startups that basically just provide what you would call government services. You pay a little extra for them, and they are extremely responsive because they're only responding to a small portion of the community. And they're startups. They're very young. If they're not responsive, they die. So I think that's really where I've seen the trend. And you could look at something like Airbnb, but you can also look at something like Chariot. Right outside of this hotel, there's a Chariot stop. That's basically a private bus line that anyone can use that is optimized for where people live and where they work. And it changes based on where people live and where they work. And so whereas I don't know when the bus lines were drawn in San Francisco, these guys can redraw the bus lines every week. And so a perfect example of getting that through the government, I don't even know how I would do, but in a city that can enable startups, the startups can kind of pick up a lot of the slack.
Could you do what you're doing anywhere else in the world?
I always get asked that question.
Oh, I did. Let me
No.
I hate asking any question that anyone has asked before. But I mean, let me frame it another way.
Yeah.
There is this sense that this Silicon Valley, Bay Area world that we're in is so unique and different, and that when you look at the money that comes piping through from your pals and yourself into the startup world, it's either going here. A lot of it's going into New York now, and a lot of it's going into the Boston area. But we just had a mayor of Salt Lake up here, of Kansas City. Steve Case and I went on this Rise of the Rest bus tour last year through a number of Midwestern cities, went on startup crawls, and visited some really incredible little outfits that I think Steve thinks he can buy on a wholesale basis rather than a retail basis. But I'm interested in whether or not this place begins to erode as other places catch up.
I think the people are everywhere. The founders are everywhere.
But money's not.
No. And I think that that's the big problem, is that we love to talk about mentoring founders and helping founders and so on and so forth. But you know what helps? A check. And I think, unfortunately, this is the only place, or one of the very few places, where there are many, many, many people who are interested in writing checks. And so it's interesting because it's the same problem internationally. I've traveled to, I think, about 18 countries, met incubators all over the world. And even internationally, people think about the Valley as, maybe I want to move here or maybe I want to fundraise here. But it's hard to raise money outside of this bubble. Very, very hard. So that's why it has somewhat of a unique position. I don't believe the other stuff, though. I don't believe the, the scent of the air inspires entrepreneur. None of that stuff matters. It's the money.
Since you called it a bubble, is it a bubble?
Yes. San Francisco, so I grew up on the East Coast.
Right. Where?
I grew up in Brooklyn, and then family went to New Jersey. And so when I came out here, I didn't understand this place. It didn't feel like a city. I don't know what it felt like.
Now you become a mogul.
No. But so I think that it's, when you say a bubble, I think it definitely is a bubble. I don't think it's as diverse as I would have expected it to be. I don't think, both racially, from an industry perspective, people's background perspective, I think it is a bubble. And I think that that's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that the best of the best in tech tend to find themselves here. And so whenever you put the best of the best in one industry all together, they can create interesting things. The curse is that without a diversity of background, we see a lack of diversity amongst the startups that are created. And so,
So that's weird. So there's this other, I guess, belief out there promulgated by people like Richard Florida, some Harvard Business School guys, that the reason that this world succeeds so well is it attracts every stripe, and that the measure and that everyone sort of miraculously gets along, that there's an unbelievable level of tolerance, and that the richest and most creative places in the world correlate with, say, gay acceptance, LGBT acceptance. So if you can accept gays, you can accept everything. And you just made an interesting comment, and it's interesting, we had the Salt Lake mayor up here, we had I didn't raise it with him. We had the mayor of Dallas earlier who deferred for a long time on LGBT and same-sex marriage in Dallas, and then came out in support of it recently. Okay. But how much of these social conditions matter in terms of the economic creativity and innovation, creativity of a urban area?
I think your list was perfect except for the top one. I think that this place is a very liberal place and is very welcoming and kind of has a history of that.
But it's not as diverse as it should be.
Because I don't think it is necessarily, oh man, it's really hard to say. When I talk to,
I mean, there are not many African American, not many black tech
people
moguls.
Here.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's challenging because if your family lives on the East Coast and all your friends live on the East Coast, and you're thinking about moving across the country, that's a big move. That's a very, very hard decision to make. And so while I think that it's not that San Francisco isn't welcoming, I think that, man, we have to make a hard pitch. Because
so do you think you need to do more yourself to help create those pathways?
Oh, yeah. So part of my job at YC is recruiting. YC is organized in a really fun way because we have about 12 investing partners, and about half of our time we spend selecting companies and helping the companies. The other half of the time we get to do whatever we want to help YC. Some people write software, some people do events. I do tons of recruiting. And part of what I try to do is everywhere in the country and around the world, find people that startups tend to knock into, and then tell them, you now know someone at YC. If you see anyone you like, you can get them to me, hour on the phone, no problem. And I say, I'm giving you the ability to pass out my calendar, so don't, use it wisely. But as a result, I probably do 20 to 30 calls a week with these founders who aren't in YC, who might one day be in YC. And so part of what I'm trying to work on is how do people attach a face, like a welcoming face to YC. I think a lot of people think it's extremely hard to get in, we might not want them, so on and so forth. And you would be surprised just getting on the phone with someone for a half hour changes their whole perspective. It's a relatively easy thing to do.
So I know you're not impressed by money. You've got a lot. No. And J.P. Morgan Chase is here. They might impress you. I'm not sure. But you've got in the room some urban practitioners, a huge, richer than God bank. And you've got, people in here. You're a very unique person that have created so many if you were to basically tell people in this room from their various niches how to do what they're doing better, or what to remove what blind spots in terms of thinking about how to wire the future in a different way, what would you want to tell J.P. Morgan? What would you want to tell an urban practitioner? What would you like to tell somebody who is working on diversity or financial literacy? I mean, everybody's in their own space, I see, often saying the thing they do more loudly. How do you promote synthesizing of this stuff?
Well, I think to the advice that I give YC startups, and I think that there are two things that are the overwhelming advice. The first one is launch. Whatever the plan is, whatever the whole thing is, I always ask, when do you plan to launch? The founder always says 3 months. I say, can you launch in 2 weeks? If the founder says 3 years, I say, can you launch in 2 weeks? I think that you don't learn anything until you launch. And I think that it's so easy, and we see this in the startup world all the time, it is so easy to not launch because you're not judged until your product's out there. And so you can plan, and you can build, and you can plan, you can build, you can plan, you can build for years. Never launch, you don't feel bad. The second you launch, you're guaranteed to feel bad because it's going to suck. But you're guaranteed to learn. I think the second thing is, God, I love when people break rules. I just don't believe in rules.
Peter Scheer breaks rules all the time.
I feel bad saying this, but I just feel like if you want to innovate, you have to be comfortable breaking rules, and the only reason that rules change is because they're broken. So it's funny when founders say to me like, oh, well, we're building this cool new device, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm just like, build it, launch it. The last thing you should worry about are the rules. Get it out there. If customers like it, we'll help you figure out how to put it within the rules.
You're also famous for telling those engaging in startups to package their idea in 30 seconds.
Yes.
And that if they succeed in getting past that next step, then go deep in a 2-minute talk.
Yes.
But the 3-minute, the 10-minute, the 30-minute talk, no way ever. that there are no good talk. I want you to come to Washington and figure out an app that can knock people for It would really be great for the Senate floor.
It's harder to be concise,
It would
right?
really change the whole, meaning of filibuster. I don't know. We could go to the microbuster and do this. But I mean, tell me just a little bit about that. And when you begin, we're talking again today about how governments, in a way, take lessons, partner with, transform themselves. I find that kind of discipline and focus is often missing in the government sector.
Well,
What's been your experience?
It's missing in startups too. I mean, that's why we have to push it so hard. I think it's.
Do you fly swat them or something?
No, we interrupt.
So do I.
I think that what's so interesting and what kind of changes people's minds when they go through YC is that most people don't actually learn what it takes to convince someone of something. And very, very specifically, most people think something which is exactly wrong. That the more words you use, the more convincing you're going to be. And we just have to convince these founders that the less words you use, the more convincing you're going to be. And I remember when I went through YC, I went through YC twice, and I was going to get up on demo day, and so the founder of YC, Paul Graham, was going over my presentation. And I wanted to put a picture and a video of my product in my presentation. And he's like, remove that crap. And I'm like, holy, this is my company. The investors aren't even going to look at the picture of my product. He said, first of all, the less you say, the better. And if you just talk about your product, they will imagineer in their head the perfect version for them. And that's what they'll invest in. The second you show them your version, they're going to be like, that's not what I want it to be.
Not invented here.
Yeah, and so it's like, the second he said that, I was like, and the YC demo day speeches are 2.5 minutes long.
Wow.
That's it. So I don't know, there's some magical power in 2 minutes.
Brevity, yeah. I want to open up to all of you. This is a fascinating mogul of this world, and I want to start with Andrew Noyes, because I'm into mogul today. I was, thinking about it. But Andrew Noyes is over here, and he's with a firm called Brigade, which just launched, I guess, yesterday or this morning. Sean Parker is one of the funders, and I was thinking about you, and I went to him and I said, kind of give me the short version, the 10-second version of what you do, and it's the Tinder for the civically engaged, right? Is that fair, Andrew? So, and he's the head of communications, so it's the Tinder for the new democracy. It's out there. If you want it, there's a beta testing. If you want me to put you on the list, I have 7 more invites I can send to people. I just went through, and I just joined up right before, so I get 10 invites. It's completely a shtick, right? Make me feel like I get 10, then another 10. Go ahead, Andrew.
I just went on there, and you and I are 100% aligned on the positions that you took. So that's good stuff. I guess I do have a question. Having kind of worked with a team to finally birth this baby after a year, once you launch and once you start doing a private beta, when do you know the timing is right to move out of the private beta, and then when is the timing right to also drop the beta? Because Gmail has been in beta for 10 years or something. Yeah.
I mean, for the advice we give to YC companies is, whether you put beta on the page or not is irrelevant. Do that for as long as you want. In terms of getting out there publicly, we always just say get out there. We have this concept called the trough of sorrows. So
the trough of sorrows.
The trough of sorrows.
Such a Game of Thrones type thing, yeah.
So basically, when you launch publicly, you get a lot of press, you get a lot of users, and your graph goes up like this. And then they all leave. And this is called the trough of sorrows. And basically,
That's next week, Andrew.
You have to experience the trough of sorrows to experience growth. You just have to go through that. So I always say, the sooner you can do it, the better. Also, being a startup founder is just getting hit constantly and getting up. And I think that you can't be afraid of the punch, because it's coming, more than one. So just get the trough of sorrows out, and then when you guys survive that, you're going to celebrate that. That's what I would tell you if you're a YC company. You guys should be a YC.
Yes, right here, right behind you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Sheila Goodman. I'm with the Reset Foundation. We're an alternative to incarceration here in California. A question I have is when we have a
You're part of the soul of the startup world.
Yeah. So I'm very curious. I love that you're in charge of recruiting and you look for a more diverse pool. What can we do to have these startups that are really burgeoning and hiring a ton of people to use more equitable practices proactively when they hire.
Oh, I love
and
this. I love this
I
question.
have like a ton of excellent, innovative rule breakers that would be fantastic at sales, and there's so many barriers up against them, and I just am really curious, like, what can we do to
So
to
you
get them
answered, and
jobs?
then I want to answer it. I think this is a really cool question.
So, you know what I would say? The only thing that works in my experience is calling people out on it. I think that it's just that simple. I think that people out here, it's easy to ignore the issue if no one's looking at it. But the second that people are looking at it, the folks out here, for the most part, will feel pretty bad. And they'll do something about it. And I think that it's really funny because I talked to kind of one of my mentors, a guy named Ken Coleman, and he said that all of the press around diversity is what's making this thing happen. Like sometimes the thing happens and the press reports it, sometimes the press happens and the thing changes. And this is definitely one of those. So I would say, beat up on everyone, including me, who's not pushing the ball fast enough, because I think that's what gets it done. Yeah.
I think Michael's absolutely right. I want to add to this because I love this question, because there is this view that going and getting mid-career training or doing non-traditional stuff, that if you just get more and more educated, but there's a built-in bias in human resources departments that anachronistically just stay away from every risk, every avant-garde, every person. And the guy to go spend some time with is Jim McKelvey, who co-founded Square with Jack Dorsey, and he created, now he's rich like you, and which brings me to a question, and he created a firm called Launch Code in Miami and St. Louis. They're educating and coding non-traditional people and whatever, but what he found is not training them, it's kicking the crap out of the human resource department. So he uses his celebrity to call he said, I can call any CEO, and I will call the CEO, and he's gotten hundreds of people hired. And I was with John Chambers of Cisco the other day, and I said, why don't you get on the phone and call some people out there to take the risk? So I recommend that you call Jim McKelvey and just start a bandwagon around that, because I think it's very important, and a lot of people don't understand that the risks that a human resources department wants to avoid are what you're trying to sort of normalize and get beyond. So good luck. I hope that continues to go well, but McKelvey would be a good ally. And John Chambers would be. We spoke about it in Washington 2 weeks ago. Other guests right over here.
Hi. I also have a question about kind of how this intersects with civic innovation. My name is Sammy Rayner. I'm with Hand Up. We're a way that local citizens
Say it one more time. Hands up.
Hand Up.
Okay.
So we're a way that local citizens can give directly to individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty right here in our community. And so I'm just curious to hear what YC, how you think about funding these entrepreneurs who are coming up, building for-profit companies, and that have a very social-oriented mission. I know you've recently brought in nonprofits, and I'm just curious if you'll be doing anything to kind of bring in more of these companies that are addressing civic issues with a for-profit model.
Yes. So
Pigeonly.
Pigeonly is a perfect example. To answer your kind of meta question, companies have to find us. And what I would say is that companies that are going after a passionate social mission disproportionately get into YC because their founders are disproportionately more passionate. But they have to apply. Part of the kind of ethos of YC is that we will not fund a company that would not exist if we didn't give them money. So like the first thing I have to say is like everyone who's doing this stuff should apply because chances are you'll get in. I think secondly, when we see it happen, it's awesome because you take the case of Pigeonly, which is supporting the families of inmates, and there was a big question in our head whether on demo day they'd be successful fundraising. And what was so funny was that like we started looking at the numbers and we realized, oh wait, this is a huge potential business. And they killed it on demo day, and purely, they are just doing good for those families. Right now those families are being exploited And those inmates are being exploited by services. And everything Pigeon Lee does is like 90% cheaper than whatever else is available. So I know that those companies can get into YC, and I'm actually surprised and really happy those companies can actually raise follow-on funding out here as well. I do think the important thing out here when it comes to the follow-on funding, though, is we have to help our companies express why the social mission can still build a billion-dollar company. I think that's the biggest problem, and the biggest thing we have to work on with founders is, Andreessen Horowitz isn't going to write a check unless we can communicate to them that your company being massively successful makes them money. Because they're nice guys, but they're not that nice.
Back to greed and soul, that precarious balance. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful. Mark Seibel of Y Combinator, thank you very, very much.